Then I am here with Rich Jehle of
Yeah,
Yellowstone
Rich
National
Jehle.
Park. Did I say it correctly? I want to call it Jelly, like Jellystone National
Jehle. Yeah, I know
Park.
I've been called worse. Yeah, it's pronounced Jehle.
Yaley. All right, I get that is a fantastic mustache, by the way. Are
Thank
you
you.
uh, are you
Appreciate that.
combing that thing? What's the maintenance regimen like?
Yeah.
Ah, it is.
But trying,
That's
have
beautiful.
some basic, etiquette as far as facial hair.
Okay. How long have you had that?
I've had it long enough that I don't remember what my face looks like. I've had this since I was in college.
Okay, you
My
are
and
just
my wife has never seen my face.
you're rocking the stash forever. We don't know what could be underneath that.
I don't know what's underneath it. I just really
Tell
don't.
me, what are your duties in the park, Rich?
Yeah, so my title is I'm the West District Resource Education Ranger. So I supervise all the visitor centers in the western part of the park here in West Yellowstone, an information station at Madison Junction. Then, of course, the real busy one is the Old Faithful Visitor Center. I have a staff of several supervisors that work underneath me that manage those locations. And then in the summer, a staff of about 30 to 35 seasonal employees, seasonal interpretive rangers that work for those locations, and about 10 permanent employees that work under me. And our job is to try and interact with visitors, provide them information, educate them about what's the park is all about. What are the resources of the park? Why is it important? Why does it matter? And teach folks about the natural history, the cultural history of Yellowstone, and hopefully so they can connect with it and enjoy it and help preserve it.
You make it sound so blasé, but I know that's an important
So it's
job.
exciting. No, it's great work. It's wonderful.
Tell me
wonderful.
about the size of the ranger staff. You made it sound like it kind of balloons seasonally.
Sure.
How big does it go?
Sure. I mean, so at the peak of the summer, which is the busiest part of the year in Yellowstone as far as visitation is in the summer. So basically May, June, July, August, and through September. At the two different locations, it's basically two what I would call sub-districts. West Yellowstone, here at the west entrance to the park, and Madison, we have one sub-district of which we have, four permanent employees or what are called career seasonal employees. They do get some furlough time in the spring and the fall, but they're on the rolls, don't have to be rehired every season. And then
Gotcha.
we have 6 seasonal employees there, and then at Old Faithful it varies a little bit depending on the year, but we have 7 permanent employees and about 20 seasonal employees. So let me add that all up, 27, and about 37 or so to 40 combination of seasonal and permanent employees at the peak of the summer. And then in the winter months, all the seasonal employees go away, and we're left with about 10 permanent employees in the district.
Okay, that's your skeleton crew.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And that's the deal with. What was the number I looked at yesterday? Last year or this fiscal year. So from October 1st of last year to September 30th of this year, we counted about 1.7 million visitors that came in our visitor centers. It's interesting the way we count that. We call it visits. That doesn't mean necessarily 1.7 million people, because you could have, people coming in several times, but well over, million and a half visitors probably coming into our facilities just in this part of the park.
With your skeleton crew.
Correct. There. And the seasonal crew. Lots of people.
Okay. And how long have you been rangering yourself?
Well, not as long as I've had the mustache. So I've been with the National Park Service 36 years. 31 of those years in Yellowstone. 5 years at another park, Dinosaur National Monument in northwestern Colorado. But most of my career has been here in Yellowstone.
All right. So a good long time.
Yeah, for sure.
Long enough to see some things. And
do things.
I read over 4 million tourists every year.
Yeah, I think it varies on the year, but in the last decade or so, we've been at or above 4 million visitors per
That's
year.
amazing. It's just a mind-boggling number. When I first read that, I was like, that can't be right. That's
It's a
so
big number.
many visitors
It's a
for
big number.
a staff that doesn't sound like it's that big
Yeah,
in
and
the
that's just,
park.
and that staff is just in this part of the park. For the whole park, in the division that I work for, the Division of Resource Education, we have a summer staff of about 80 seasonals and about 25 permanent employees. So it's,
Still,
compared to
versus
most
4
national parks,
million.
yeah, no, yeah. Now that's not counting. There's a lot of other employees in the park that do different things. We have folks that do facilities maintenance, and we have folks that do law enforcement, administration, resource management. So this, our staff is a smaller part of the overall bigger workforce. But yeah, we're the ones that are primarily working with visitor center or in the visitor centers and working with visitors in the
And
park
engaging with
and
them.
engaging with them
And
in a way
every
where we're not giving them a ticket for something. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha. And speaking of that, so with over 4 million visitors, you're bound to have some bad apples in there.
Sure.
But am I wrong in saying that like it seems that the number of those bad apples rises every year?
Oh, I don't know if that's the case or not. I mean, I think, and I'm not in the visitor protection or law enforcement end of this work, so I don't have the numbers to back this up off the top of my head. But I did hear many years ago a ranger that was a peer of mine in the park here who was in law enforcement ranger. He said, people don't come to Yellowstone to commit felonies generally.
Yeah.
People, I think there's it's in a lot of ways, when you have that many people, there's bound to be a certain percentage that are probably doing that, right? I mean, but
Sure.
it's very small.
Yeah.
Most of the infractions or most of the resource violations, if you will, that we get in Yellowstone. So, people approaching wildlife too closely, people walking off the boardwalks and the geyser basins. In my opinion, most of that is
Going
not
for a
because
dip in
people
a
are
paint pot.
intentionally, they're not, or whatever it is. They're not maliciously trying to, break the law for the sake of breaking the law. Most of the time, this environment is so foreign to people. It's such a strange, most people that come here don't have bison living in their yard or in their town, for instance, or grizzly bears or geysers or hot springs. And so they get here and they're really excited. And sometimes they do things that it's just out of exuberance and excitement, and because they don't know any better, or they don't know that it's unsafe to approach a bison or an elk, or to put your finger in the runoff of Old Faithful Geyser, things like that. So these things do happen, but most of the time, I would say the vast majority of the time, at least when we're trying to work with visitors that are doing that, we're just trying to educate them, right?
Yeah.
We see somebody approaching a bison too close, we will say, "Sir, please, you need to move away from the bison because it's unsafe." And 99 times out of 100, people listen to you and do it. Every once in a while, they don't. And 99 times out of 100, when they don't, they eventually move away. But one time out of 1,000, we have to call for the ranger to come and talk to them, maybe explain to them why it's illegal, and then probably one time out of 1,000 that happens, they end up getting a ticket. So it's really, the level of maliciousness and law breaking in this park, I think most of it is probably over exaggerated.
Yeah.
It does happen.
Okay.
Certainly, people do silly things in Yellowstone all the time. It's amazing that more people aren't hurt than they are, frankly.
But it's just getting more headlines now. There are more people with their cell phones, and now it's getting on social media.
Every time somebody does something silly, somebody's filming it. Usually, seems that way. So,
well, you seem very fair and very patient with all of the visitors, so you're probably the right man for the job there. How far along? Just changing subjects. How far along are the flood recovery efforts at this point?
Oh, it's remarkable what happened in the last year. So, again, the big flood event took place on June 13th to 12th, 13th of 2022.
Right.
By the end of the season last year, and that basically washed out huge chunks of the north entrance road between Gardner, Montana, and Mammoth Hot Springs, that 5-mile stretch of road down along the Gardner River. Big chunks of the road out on the northeast entrance road between Tower Junction and Cook City were also washed out. Both of those roads, I should say the road from Gardner to Mammoth, there was an alternate route, what was used to be called the Old Gardner Road, which was an old stagecoach road, which took a different route, sort of up on the hills instead of down in the river canyon. And that was a dirt road, since probably for the last 100 years. Very rough,
Yeah.
very bumpy. It really wasn't used much by vehicles. That road was transformed into a 2-lane paved road
Oh,
by
wow.
the end of October last year. I mean, just a remarkable 5-mile stretch of work that, I think our superintendent, Cam Shelley, would probably tell you that he's not aware of anything like that ever happening that rapidly anywhere else in this country in memory.
Yeah.
And then the Northeast entrance road also reopened by the end of the year last year. There was still some ongoing work, and there continues to be some ongoing work out there even now. And we're also looking at, what are long-term possible other routes that may be placed in there on the North Entrance Road, because that old Gardner Road that is now the North Entrance Road is really, in spots, really steep and really windy, and there may be other routes that might be better, but it's
Yeah.
usable right now. So it was, we've come a long way. There was a stretch there for several weeks last year where, if you look at the park map, the park roads form a figure 8. So you got this upper loop
Yep.
and the lower loop. And that upper loop, there was a period there for probably about 10 days where that was closed altogether. And eventually that was reopened. And so, this year was almost like a normal year. The only thing that was really different is that North Entrance Road had a different alignment. So visitation went right back up, last year our visitation was down significantly because really only 3 out of the 5 entrances were open for
Yeah.
most of the summer, until the very end of the summer, when the North and the Northeast entrance roads were still reopened to the public. So, just remarkable progress, remarkably quickly. There's still a lot of work going on, but if you would have asked me a year ago, I would have thought wouldn't have been possible to be where we
That
ended up.
is, it's incredible. And
Yeah.
if you're looking for alternate ways to get into the park, I think, what about putting in a channel? That might be a good way to get
you
people
run
in.
into, you might run into some geothermal heat issues with that, or
Well,
some of
a
the
glass
geologic
a glass channel so people can see those features as they go.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
So this is related to the flood, but in your years as a Yellowstone National Park ranger, have you experienced measurable effects of climate change?
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I am not the expert on climate change as some people in this park are, but
Yeah.
in the years that I've been here and in talking to people that have been here even longer than I have, I think one of the things that is noticeably different is sort of the length of winter and some of the extreme temperature winter events that we maybe experienced in previous generations that we don't see as much of anymore. And again,
Yeah.
there's a distinction between weather and climate, right?
Sure.
So, in any given year, you can have weather events that are still extreme, but the overall trend, at least from my understanding and also from what I've witnessed for myself, seems to be that the winters do not seem to be quite as long, do not seem to be quite as, we don't tend to get the lengthy, super, weeks long stretch of super cold, sub-zero, 30, 40, 50 below zero temperatures that we may have gotten a generation ago or 2 generations ago. On a more measurable basis, and this isn't talking to people like Doug Smith, who was our wolf biologist for many years, just retired last year. One of the things that we're starting to see is the amount of time that snow is on the ground in the spring, for instance, is just shorter by a few days or maybe even a week than it was 30 years ago or 35 years ago. And that affects the way plants grow. So, for instance, up in the northern range of the park, up between Gardner, Mammoth, and the northeast entrance of Cook City, the snow is melting out a little bit faster on average in most years than it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And what that means is there's less moisture in the ground. It may mean that there's, a longer growing season for things like willows or aspen by a week or so, which may not seem like much, but it has an effect. We're certainly seeing a rebounding of things like willow and some of the streams in the northern range. Now, there's different arguments on why that is. Doug Smith would probably tell you that it has to do with the presence of wolves on the landscape, which is inhibiting the number of elk on the landscape and changing how they move around.
Yeah.
That was called the trophic cascade. That was a big argument he made. There are others in the scientific community who say that's probably part of it, but there's probably a climate change factor there too. It ties back into that. You got a few more days of growing season. Winter's a little bit shorter, and so willows may get a week jump start that they didn't used to have. So it's a lot of stuff that's being studied. There's a lot of unknowns, but the general trend certainly is that climate change is real, and it's affecting national parks, and there's measurable effects in places like Yellowstone.
And it also sounds like the one thing everybody can agree on is it's all related.
It's definitely, everything's related. I mean, Yellowstone is an ecosystem, much a part of a much larger global ecosystem, but it's certainly an ecosystem where all the non-living parts, if you change something, the amount of sunshine, the amount of time snow's on the ground, it affects the living things, and everything affects everything else. And oftentimes in ways that we don't understand. We're just beginning to understand how complex ecosystems are. And Yellowstone's a pretty good place to study these kinds of effects because for the most part, Yellowstone's a pretty intact natural system where changes, you can observe changes because you don't have a lot of external effects. There's a lot of basically wilderness in Yellowstone and in the Yellowstone ecosystem where most of these natural processes can operate as they're going to without the effect of humans.
It's part of what makes it special.
Yes, it is.
And I guess this time of year, even less interaction between human and wildlife. Tell me about the winter operations there right now.
Sure.
Is it nice to deal with more wildlife than tourists for a change?
Yeah, it's interesting because, this time of year, especially, what is the date today? November 6th. The only section of road that's open year round to wheeled vehicles is, again, that stretch from the north entrance of Gardner, Montana, through Mammoth Hot Springs, out to Tower Junction, and then out to the northeast entrance and to Cook City, Montana, just a couple miles outside the northeast entrance. So that 50-mile stretch up in the northern, I got to turn my phone off here, the northern part of the park.
Unprofessional.
I know, that was bad. So the rest of the park, the interior of the park, the majority of it is closes for wheeled vehicle traffic. The last day we were open this year is October 31st. So basically November, we'll reopen for winter season December 15th. And so we got about 6 weeks here where we're allowing snow to build up, where there's a lot of the park staff is leaving the park, going on their non-pay or their furlough for a few weeks, and then coming back for winter. Once we get into winter, those interior park roads that are closed to wheeled vehicles right now will remain closed to wheeled vehicles for the winter and only be open to over snow traffic, snowmobiles, and snow coaches, mostly through guided trips into the park for visitors coming in. So the operation in the winter is definitely different. I mean, Yellowstone's winters, it makes this place a totally different park than it is in the summer. For those who have not experienced Yellowstone in the winter, it's really one of the most extreme winter environments in the continental United States, as far as just enormous amounts of snow, the average snowfall in the park, depending on where you're at, but over much of the interior of the park, it may be 200, even up to 300 inches of average snowfall in the winter. We can get stretches of extremely cold weather. One of the coldest recorded temperatures ever in the continental United States, it was the record for many years, was recorded just east of where I'm at in West Yellowstone, a couple miles east of here, back in 1930. I think it was in the mid 1930s. I forget the exact year, but a temperature reading of 66 below Fahrenheit, and that was only because that's as low as the thermometer went. Yeah, so and I think that was subsequently broken another place up in Rogers Pass up in northern Montana outside of Missoula in 1970, if I'm not mistaken. But it's, super cold temperatures. And it's still not unusual for us to get temperatures well below zero, 30 or 40 below zero. Last year, I know we had one or two days that were 50 below or around that 50 below range. So really cold and lots of snow. And so if you're living and working in the park, Or if you're wildlife in the park, you have to be able to adapt to those conditions to survive.
Yeah.
For wildlife, it's in a lot of ways visiting Yellowstone in the winter, you see more wildlife than you do in the summer, with the exception of things
Really?
like bears. Sure, because the bears hibernate for the most part, unless you get really warm spells in the winter, they can come out. But for the most part, you don't see bears in the winter. But the large animals, the grazing animals like the bison and the elk, the ungulates, instead of being dispersed over the landscape and up at higher elevations and all over the place in the winter, they move down. They're going to be down in the river valleys. And where did we put the roads in the park? When the road system was built in the late 1800s, in what's basically the same alignment we have now, they put the roads down in the river valleys because that was the natural travel corridors. So you tend to see a lot of wildlife in the winter. And that's not just in the interior, but especially out in that northern part, out through Lamar Valley, the northeast entrance road. I mean, there's, bison and elk are common. And, what do the predators do? Where do the wolves go? They go where the elk are. They go where the bison are.
Yeah.
So you tend to see more wolves in the winter. Coyotes, things like coyotes, red fox are commonly seen in the winter. It's winter wildlife viewing is amazing. And another thing that's interesting on the west side of the park here, and also over on the Yellowstone River, out in the east side of the park, is we get this huge. There's actually some animals that migrate into Yellowstone in the winter, if you can believe that. And the one that comes to mind is trumpeter swans. It's just the largest waterfowl in North America. They come into Yellowstone from Canada by the hundreds in the winter to
Really?
occupy the Madison River, in particularly because it's fed by hot water from the geyser basins and the Old Faithful area and down along the Firehole River, and so it never freezes. And so they're looking for open water, and you'll see hundreds of trumpeter swans, for instance, on the Madison River that you don't see in the summer. So winter is spectacular for wildlife viewing. A lot of times it's better than the summer.
Because they want to soak. They want to get in the
they
hot
want
springs
to
there.
Well, they just want to be able to get to the bottom so they
Yeah.
can feed on the vegetation, and I'm going to get a drink of water.
That's amazing. So it does sound like you have to work a little bit harder to get into the park, but it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, getting access into the park in the winter. Again, for the most of the interior of the park, you can only get in there on guided trips by snowmobile or by snow coach. So that's that takes some effort, right? I mean, it's not like right now or in the summer you can just go. You're in your t-shirts and your shorts and your sandals. You can go get in the car and go drive in. Now it's like it takes the winter. Thing about winter for me is it takes 3 times as long to get ready to do anything, right?
Sure.
Just getting dressed takes longer. And you got to get out there and you got to, get on the snowmobile. You got to get it started up. You got to, it takes longer to get around. The pace of life, the pace of moving around is slower.
Yeah.
And so that's, in a lot of ways that lends itself to experiencing Yellowstone in a totally different way than you do in the summer. It takes more effort. And so I think you appreciate it more. When you get in there, especially in my part of the park and in other parts of the park where there's thermal features, the geysers, the hot springs, mud pots, the steam vents, they look totally different in the winter.
Yeah.
When you have, boiling water, and at this elevation, Old Faithful, for instance, it's about 199 degrees. When that water hits 80-degree air in the summer, it's beautiful. It makes a big steam cloud. But when that water hits air that's 200 or that's 0 degrees in the winter, I mean, it makes every feature look enormously
just
larger, much larger, because there's a lot more steam. That meeting of hot water and cold air. A lot of times you'll see features that you didn't even know were there in the summer, because every little feature just puts out a lot more steam because of the cold air. So that makes it a different place.
It sounds magnificent. And and speaking of magic, you may also get to see Rich's mustache covered in snow if you get lucky.
You do, yeah, no, you definitely will sometimes on those 0-degree days. Yeah, it's a sight.
Well, I'm going to have to do that myself, and hopefully you'll have a lot more people who watch this and listen to it who also are interested. So thank you very much, Rich, for coming on the show, and it was really interesting talking to you. So I'll let you get back to your winter operations.
My pleasure. Come on down. Have your visitors or your listeners come down and enjoy the park in the winter. There's nothing like it.
Absolutely. Will do. Have yourself a good one.
Okay, thank you so much.